I would, since we have all those scholars, I would like to have exchanges of views rather than I make a unilateral statement of mine. But for initial, I suppose, 30 minutes, I will make my own presentation about the opportunities and risks in East Asia. I have spent very many years in the Japanese Foreign Ministry dealing with the question of East Asia. For the initial 20 years, I was more to do with U.S.-Japan relations, both economic, political, and security. But the latter half, the 20-some years in the Japanese Foreign Ministry, I dealt question of North Korea, question of China, and Asia as a whole. So since my retirement from the Foreign Ministry in 2005, my focus is very much with East Asia, because for Japan, East Asia is clearly the region which the stability or instability would greatly matter, because the nation like Japan, who will be suffering from the shortage of labor, shortage of many things, we would have to rely upon the dynamic growth in East Asia. And for that, the basic strategy on the part of Japan is to expand its opportunities and reduce, minimize the risks associating with East Asia. So let me first talk about risk part. We all know that the short term or immediate term, we have question of North Korea, and longer term, China. So first, let me focus on those two nations, North Korea and China. North Korea, as a matter of fact, first time I came to Seoul for the first time in 1988, January 1988. I became director in charge of Korean Peninsula I think November 1987. And immediately I assumed the post of director for Northeast Asia in the Japanese Foreign Ministry. We had this horrible attack on Korean airliner, which killed about 120 some people. Was the North Korean attack. I had not known anything about North Korea. I hadn't known anything about Korea as well, South Korea as well. But immediately after I assumed the post, this incident took place. And my minister at that time asked me to go to Seoul and to have an interview with Kim Hyun-hee. Because Japan was trying to introduce economic sanction to North Korea after the confession Kim Hyun-hee made in Seoul. And my minister asked me to go to Seoul and to have an interview so that we will be convinced of this being the act committed by North Korea. And I still remember it was January 1988. I went to the Foreign Ministry here, went to the room of Director General for Asian Affairs. And KCIA came to visit this room of the Director General for Asian Affairs of Foreign for a ministry. And I was taken by him to the mountain somewhere, and I wrote an interpreter because I don't speak Korean language. So myself and interpreter first being briefed by KCIA in one of the hotel there, and he sort of he said to me that they knew me well. They knew me well. And I mean, this man in KCIE deliberately talked about the question of abduction at that time. The Japanese being abducted to North Korea and became teacher of Japanese teacher of Kim Hyung-hee, the agent. That was a deliberate briefing by KCIE on me, because clearly South Korea at that time wanted Japan to take harsh measures against North Korea. That's probably intention of that. But that was the first time when I encountered with something like North Korea. That's January 1988. I was surprised to hear from her that indeed, I mean, education can change people. She received North Korean education from 3 years old. And she's an elite person, but yet she, learned all this Juche concept, and every day she was taught that everything taking place outside North Korea is a fabrication. Is the South Korea prosperity, that's nothing. Behind all this prosperity, there are people who are suffering from the poverty and all sorts of things. That was the education she received. And she didn't have any question about what she was asked to do. Just plant a time bomb on the airplane. That was a very shocking experience of mine. That was in 1988. And I was the first Japanese official who received a briefing on the development of North Korean nuclear weapon in 1989 by the group of American intelligence headed by CIA. And I clearly remember the time when I saw this picture of Yeonbyeong, this smoke coming out of the facility, and trucks were there. It was 1989, and I was in charge of the question of the first North Korean nuclear crisis, 93-94. I prepared for contingency plans 94, and I mean, at that time, we were trying to introduce, again, sanction measures. And North Korea made a declaration that implementation of economic sanctions be interpreted as the declaration of war. So we started preparing for the countermeasures along with the United States. I still remember the time when I received a huge document describing all the needed materials, support, and all sorts of things, because the United States were bringing in 250 fighter airplanes to Japan to fight in the Korean Peninsula in case North Korea crossed the border. So that was a very, very shocking memory of mine. And by the way, I found out that Japan was not prepared for doing anything in relation to this type of conflict situation, because Japan didn't have any wartime legislation and all sorts of things. Everything needed to be done by without having right legislative basis. That's the reason why we prepared for Defense Cooperation Guidelines in 1997. I was again in charge of the U.S.-Japan Security Affairs in 1996, 1997. And we introduced U.S.-Japan Security Declaration and Defense Cooperation Guidelines. And the very assumption of that Defense Cooperation Guideline was indeed Korean crisis. I remember the time when I went in the situation room of Pentagon in the United States, and I was surrounded by all the intelligence community, and we discussed about future of North Korea. And as a result of one day, very intense discussion, our conclusion at that time, 1996, the conclusion was that every day is with us. Every day North Korean military is getting less formidable. So, end of the day, North Korea will collapse. That is a conclusion we arrived at in 1996, along with all those U.S. intelligence officers and Pentagon people.